Majors, the committee clerk. This meeting is being live streamed. In order to ensure that this meeting remains accessible to the public, it will be recessed for 15 minutes if the live stream is interrupted or fails. Staff will work to get the live stream up and running as soon as possible, and we will keep the committee advised. We shall now commence the meeting with a roll call. Councillor Carlson? Thank you. Councillor Fortini?
And I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Inika? He's not in at the moment. Councillor Innes?
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Councillor Kiernan?
Morning, present.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros?
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Councillor Parrish?
Yes.
Councillor Starr?
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson? He's not here yet. Councillor Vicente?
Here.
Other councillors present will be noted in the minutes. Before we proceed with today's meeting, please note that at the October 7th, 2021 PGMC meeting, no conflicts of interest were declared. The agenda for the meeting was approved and all delegations were received. Today's first item of business will be the continuation of the discussions under item 5.1, PL 2051 Regional Official Plan Review and MCR Overview, Update and Key Issues. With committee's permission, Adrian Smith would like to say a few words about the October 7th staff presentation, cover the materials for today's agenda and this afternoon's workshop. Councillor Parrish will now preside over the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I would like to call on Adrian Smith to start the meeting off with an overview.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thought it might be useful just to start off with a reminder that after the delegations on October 7th, we were able to get through the staff presentation at item 5.1 and several questions related to that. And that presentation provided an overview of the draft policy directions and recommendations in the Municipal Comprehensive Review Official Plan Amendment that's proceeding to statutory consultation in the next few weeks. In the presentation, we had a particular focus on the environment and climate change, growth management, settlement expansion, and also in discussing settlement expansion, we did touch on some of the scenarios that were used in the analysis, and Tara outlined the final staff recommended settlement expansion mapping that's included in the draft amendment. So just to note that presentation did cover some of the detail around the topics that are discussed in written form in the information reports that are also on the agenda today. So that's items 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4. And we actually have, for this afternoon's council workshop, we have more detail on those items covered just the way that events have unfolded with the timing of all this. So there is more detail on all this in the workshop this afternoon. So of course, we'd be happy to continue to answer questions on the presentation, on the material and the information reports, but just note that some of the questions may be answered in this afternoon's material as well. So just wanted to provide that reminder of where we were at, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Adrian. I assume we were finished 5.1 and heading into 5.2. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's correct. We had finished 5.1. We completed all that. There were a few questions, and we were about to head into 5.2. But I just wanted to note that 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4 basically are written material that was covered in the presentation and also is covered in more detail this afternoon as well. So
are you suggesting we don't really have to have staff presentations on those three remaining items? That just questions?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, that was so the overview was covered on those from last week, and those are just sort of written for information reports to provide that additional detail that'll be covered again this afternoon in even more detail.
Okay, perfect. So my next task would be to ask members of the committee if they have any questions on 5.2.
Before we proceed, Madam Chair, we just need a formal motion of receipt for Adrian's presentation, which was
okay. Sorry,
last
I'm a bit rusty.
You're okay.
Councilor Starr will move receipt. Anybody object? Excellent. So we'll move to 5.2. We won't go through the presentation because we're going to hear it this afternoon. And it has been, an overview has been done. Does anyone have any questions on 5.2? Seeing none, Jennifer, can you move receipt of 5.2?
Sure.
Thank you. Any objections? Okay. And we'll go to 5.3. Are there any questions on 5.3? Field Land Needs Assessment Report. Councillor Innes?
Thank you. Adrian, I know we've had these conversations before, and in particular from Caledon's perspective with regards to employment lands. The lands need methodology that was used, are there opportunities, because we're growing like this. We take our residential and our employment and they're balancing out, but that's not helping Caledon reach its optimal tax ratio balance for industrial, commercial versus residential. So if we keep growing at the same rate, we're never going to reach that optimal 60-40, let alone 70-30. And so wondering where the opportunities are for those employment lands. We're starving for employment lands now. We're turning businesses away constantly, which isn't good for Peel and it's not good for Caledon. And it's definitely not good for our tax assessment ratio. And that tax assessment is desperately needed to help protect that 80% of land mass that's not developable within Caledon. So I guess my question to you is, the land needs methodology and the provincial requirements, are those at a minimum, and is there an opportunity to look at growing some of those areas through the process so that Caledon can reach its more optimal tax ratio balance, which I think would ultimately help Peel as well?
So through you, Madam Chair, I can start off a response to that. I think certainly the work that we've done for the settlement boundary expansion work and identifying employment lands is based on the land needs assessment methodology that is set out by the province. And there's a very sort of established mechanism for identifying what your employment needs are, what can be met by the existing designated land and intensification within those lands and remaining vacant lands and all of that. And then for different types of employment, you need to look at what your needs are in terms of meeting the provincial employment overall target. And a part of a component of that land needs assessment then results in additional employment land, so that industrial warehousing, that kind of land that you will need to accommodate your employment targets. And that's where where we focused on meeting those targets set out through the provincial land needs assessment methodology, and we've identified, we believe, the best, most suitable lands to accommodate that, and we'll hear from stakeholders through this consultation. But you are correct that the provincial policy framework does allow for employment lands to identify future strategic employment lands, and above and beyond what the land needs methodology sets out. And so we've done that, as you know, in the airport road corridor. Also, a fairly recent change to the growth plan did set out that those land needs assessment results are a minimum that needs to be planned for. There is a sort of I guess, permission for municipalities to designate over and above what the land needs methodology identifies, but it's not a blank check. You need to have, comprehensive analysis in terms of, what the basis for such a designation would be. You need to sort of show why the lands demonstrated by the land needs assessment are not sufficient, and why you need to identify more. And I would also point out that in terms of what the region is sort of required to do in terms of identifying the employment lands needed to meet the provincial targets, there is still lots of scope for the local municipality in their detailed land use planning to identify a variety of uses within the balance of the lands. What the region is required to do is sort of protect at a minimum what's needed to meet provincial targets. Local municipalities have lots of scope within the balance of the lands through their local official plan, through their secondary planning, through their zoning, to plan for a variety of employment uses on the balance of the lands as well.
So I guess, and I understand that through the secondary plan process, it's up to the municipality to designate and then do the detailed design and the site plans for the boundaries that's been expanded by the region. I guess my concern is a minimum is not enough. A minimum keeps us at the current tax ratio that we're at. So I guess I'm asking, you've said that we need to show specifically where and how and why we need those boundaries for employment to be greater. And I guess I'm asking, what exactly are you looking for from us to show you that? Because everything from our side is basically saying that the employment lands that we've identified thus far will keep us at our current tax ratio growth moving forward for the next 25 years. And Caledon's telling you an 80-20 tax ratio is not sustainable and not sufficient, especially when Caledon is going to be having the highest growth trajectory in the entire GTAH over the next 25 years. This is the opportunity where we can work to balance that tax ratio. I look at Mississauga, and Chair Parrish could correct me if I'm wrong, but they're closer to the 60-40. They've had that opportunity to build those employment lands to balance that tax ratio, which not only benefits Mississauga and their residential tax base, but also the region of Peel. Caledon is asking for that same opportunity because now is the time to do it while we're planning and preparing for that growth over the next 25 years. We all know that growth does not pay for itself. And this will be a massive burden on our residential tax base. And so I guess I'm asking what is required of the region of Peel for Caledon to provide to expand and not just do the minimum and to help us grow that tax base so that we are sustainable financially into the future.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say that certainly tax revenue is going to be a really important consideration for Caledon and for the region. In terms of the land use planning recommendations that we're bringing forward, that's part of the consideration, but it would also, our recommendations need to be based on evidence that goes beyond just sort of the revenue side, but looks at the employment planning, employment mix, and the land use considerations around that. So we feel that what we've brought forward sort of has a complete package around that. But we're open to input from Caledon around the mix of employment, the quantum of employment, and what that means from a land use perspective on the ground. And we'd be happy to sort of engage. And I know that your staff, Ed, has reached out and wants to engage in those conversations. We're happy to do that. But that's what we'd be looking for, not just sort of a financial aspect. That's one piece, but we would need a complete package around employment mix, employment growth, and needs and land use in order to bring forward complete recommendations around our work.
Okay, so I sort of feel like that's the chicken and the egg, because that planning is supposed to be done by the municipality after the official plan is done. But we will ask staff to come back and to have those conversations with you. I think that really is important. Caledon is trying to get a mixed use of employment lands and has strategically been working toward the ideas of eco parks and whatnot. So I'll leave that for now, but I think that we do need to have greater discussion, because the financial security and sustainability of the region and the town of Caledon is of importance. So I think that we need to take that into consideration when we're doing that. And I guess my only second part of this question is, what happens when, so right now, one of the land needs assessment has indicated that certain lands are designated as community lands. And when we are going through our secondary plan process and we must adhere to provincial legislation, what happens to those community lands? Because are we going to have to come back to the region to ask for these little 40-hectare pieces to accommodate those community lands somewhere else because we have to adhere to provincial legislation? And I'm speaking specifically of PZ in the area that I represent, because I'm concerned that that leads to piecemeal planning. And we have to allot for, I know the land needs assessment is a little bit easier to pinpoint when it comes to the community lands as opposed to the employment lands. Those have lots of greater variables, but community lands is you know, whether or not it's an MTSA, that's pretty much the only difference, but the density targets within those community lands. So I guess my question to you is, what is staff's recommendation if the option goes forward that shows PZ having community lands? What will Caledon and Peel's response basically be when it's time to actually add land somewhere else? Because we have to adhere to provincial legislation when we're doing the site plan policy and the secondary plan policy on those lands. So I guess my you know, one of your plans, land needs assessment, you're showing us how much residential community land we need, but you're putting those community lands in a place that Caledon can't legally. Actually, the region can't even legally. I'm questioning why that's happening. Caledon legally can't make those all community land, even though there's a mixed use identified within the permittance. We don't even know what that means. And so there's a significant portion that's been allocated to that area. And I'm concerned that we may not be able to accommodate that entire area, maybe some of it, but not the entire area, which means we're going to have to come back and ask for a 40-hectare expansion somewhere else, which leads to piecemeal planning, which we don't really want to do. So I guess I'm looking for a response in what happens in those scenarios so that this committee is aware of it when we get to the point of actually approving where those community versus employment lands are.
So through you, Madam Chair, I would point out that you know, the community lands terminology comes from the provincial land needs assessment, and it sort of distinguish employment lands from other general lands. It's not actually, you know, a designation in the regional official plan. We have a designation for employment areas and certain you know, policies and restrictions that go along with that. Community lands are just sort of what's left over, and it can be a whole variety of uses that do get established at the local level. And so there's no need, you know, if, you know, as that unfolds, provided that you're meeting sort of the overall policy framework of the region or what have you, there's no need for sort of an accounting of lands if there are lands that are identified at the local level for employment or commercial or other uses. There's sort of not an accounting for that. In terms of the provincially significant employment zone designation and its implications for land use, as you mentioned, that's a bit unclear, and the province hasn't provided comprehensive guidelines around that. But in the legislation, the primary sort of I guess implementation element of the provincially significant employment zones is a prohibition on conversions of employment lands outside of a municipal comprehensive review. So in those cases where we're looking at settlement boundary expansion, there is no existing designation, no conversion. So that's a factor. And also the province has sort of made it clear that the municipal comprehensive review process is the process by which we look at, you know, what lands are suitable for designation of employment. And, you know, we've put forward our best recommendation, and, you know, we do have all this material out to the province for comment. We'll hear back from them. And ultimately we'll move forward on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Adrian.
Adrian, I have a question from Councillor Kiernan.
I think Mayor Thompson's got his hand up before me, Madam Chair, but your choice.
Go ahead, Councillor Kiernan.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Chair Parrish. Adrian, I had a couple of questions, and I had to regroup a bit because it was right at where I was going to ask these questions that we lost the feed last time. So it's a bit of recap, if you will. My questions, Adrian, were regarding some of the settlement area boundary expansions and reviewing them. Some of them made absolute sense to me. There are a couple that I'm having a hard time reconciling, and perhaps you can assist with that. I guess the one that is glaring to me right now would be in the northwest area of Caledon, the expansion in Inglewood coming up on Old Base Line onto Huron, Ontario. And to me, that was a bit of a, I couldn't really see my way around that. And, you know, plainly speaking, you know, I'm trying to understand where that would arise. Is it, you know, we don't want it to be developer driven, obviously, but I know that those lands have been purchased and that kind of thing, because, you know, we have some severe issues with traffic and accidents and concerns on Highway 10. So to expand the settlement area there just didn't make sense to me. I don't believe there's any infrastructure for sanitary sewers. So, you know, that again would be a curious choice. And potentially the one in Caledon Village too. Can you just help me understand how those were determined to be considered as SABES?
Through Madam Chair, I'll start us off with a little bit of context, and then we also have Stefan from Hempson, who undertook the rural settlements work and made some recommendations on that front. I guess I would start off by saying, you know, as you'll have seen in the work, in large measure, you know, we're not supporting settlement expansions in the rural settlements because, you know, we have lots of opportunities within the region to accommodate growth in serviced areas, and there is potential already within a number of the settlements for that, you know, continued modest incremental opportunities for small amounts of infill, and so we're not supporting expansion, particularly any expansions into the green belt to accommodate growth of our rural settlements. And there are a couple of exceptions that you've noted where we haven't necessarily come to conclusion, but we've signaled in our work that these are ones that we think there might be some merit in. And for the most part, those two that we've identified are where we've got existing situations on the ground that we think there's some merit in sort of looking a little bit more closely, perhaps providing a little bit of an opportunity for Caledon through the region's work to do some more work in those areas and perhaps explore whether those existing situations on the ground warrant a more sort of proactive approach to managing those lands within the settlement boundary as opposed to sort of leaving them out. So those are the couple of examples, and maybe I'll pass it over to Stefan to sort of mention why those two examples. We've opened the door for those a little bit.
Thank you.
Stefan, I think you're on the line there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that Adrian's covered it very succinctly. I mean, essentially, our work on the rural settlements concluded they should play a very limited role in accommodating population and employment growth to 2051. And so there's very little justification for expanding any of the rural settlement area boundaries in the Greenbelt area, given that the forecasted growth can be accommodated in those SABE lands in the sort of the southern part of the municipality. But in a couple of instances, you know, what we've suggested is that further review should be undertaken because there are sort of pre-existing conditions that sort of lend themselves perhaps to some of the proposals that are taking place. And the one in Inglewood, for example, is something that could be serviced by existing municipal water and wastewater systems. And we think that which is it's a very small expansion that essentially confirms you know, the existing configuration of that settlement without jeopardizing intensification opportunities in that existing village.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Just may I ask you to help me understand, you said pre-existing conditions. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the Inglewood case, and I may need to you know, bring up the apps the details on it, but in the Inglewood case, this is a property that that's at the intersection of Old Baseline Road and Huron, Ontario, and those lands are mostly urban. They contain a cluster of commercial and residential uses already, and so it sort of confirms what is going on around that intersection. And as I say, it is already connected into the existing municipal water and wastewater system. So it effectively functions as part of the rural settlement.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Thompson?
Oh, to follow up real quickly on the settlement boundaries, I understand you're talking about Greenfield, but there's some things that we're asking in our official plan to correct. We have Cheltenham, we have Terracotta, we have Inglewood, we have Campbell's Cross. We're part of the communities. When we did our first official plan, they drew a crayon but never got the lots right. So we got parts of our community that are not in, especially the north end of Inglewood, the west side of Cheltenham, Terracottas, even on the north east corner. There's certain little areas that we still need to configure in. So I hope we can get those added. These were oversights, but back when this was first designed, we didn't really deal with photos and everything else. It was just guessing on a map when they had to draw these lines. So I really hope we can get that corrected. Adrian, it's just, to me, is housekeeping, and I hope that can be considered. I'll maybe clarify on that first question, but I think we're good on that, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, those you're quite correct. Some of those old boundaries go back to sort of pre-GIS days, and were drawn, on Mylar and that. And we have worked with town staff and the Niagara Escarpment Commission and others to make sure we've got the correct boundaries and that all updated in our plan. And I think we're good on that, and we're looking to confirm that with everybody.
Thank you. And Adrian, to follow up with what Councillor Ennis was saying, and I know that's what I was asked at the last meeting when things started to crash for us, is where I was saying you're quite correct. The employment tax base we need to grow, and that's why I was asking, versus Sand Hill, if we could move it up to Castlederg to have an MCR done so that we can be able to do that, because we got to find that dry industrial where the open storage is that we don't really accommodate in an employment planning, but we need to do that to fix the problem that we have with illegal trucking, illegal contractor yards and everything. We got to find a place and a home for them. But what I'm just saying, going forward, that is something that we definitely need. And even in the provincial policy statement said that we need to bank on future employment areas. And with Caledon, only 20% of Caledon is ever allowed to grow. The rest of it, 80% of Caledon is protected. To keep that sustainable, we need that employment tax base to keep us sustainable, because as we know, the residential doesn't pay for itself. It's the employment that pays the freight for everything. So this is something that Mississauga's enjoyed, and I know Brampton's kind of been bouncing back and forth, and it's working well for them at the moment. But this is something is lessons learned. Let's follow with what makes sense. And I understand this is the toughest challenge I find with planning by numbers is how do you grow to build that tax base to be sustainable for the long term? We only have one chance of getting it right, and I think that's what we were asking for, is just a little more latitude. And we had a lively discussion on our own workshop here at Caledon on our official plan, and I think these are just some of the things we're asking. Go to the public meetings. I encourage that, but I'm just saying I'm just giving an example. Is it's okay to complain. I'm not about to blow anything up. I'm just saying, how can we make it better and make it more effective for where we're trying to go on our SAVE planning in Caledon. Thank you.
Adrian, do you have a comment?
No, just that we look forward to continuing to engage on that, and we certainly do understand, and we think we've got a good response in terms of the the airport road area and providing an opportunity for that dry industrial, and happy to engage with you on those details.
Thank you.
And just clearly in my own mind, the region has been given the job of designating employment areas and residential areas by the province, correct?
designating employment areas, and then the remaining lands are community areas, so largely residential, but other things, yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
And we're required to do that through the MCR in the time frame set by the province. It's not something we can sort of leave to a later date. It's got to be done as part of the MCR too.
I get that, because if we don't do it, the province will do it, and that takes it all of our hands. So we also have to be very concerned about servicing, because that's where the money is. And I'm just trying to follow this. I read an article in the Pointer this morning that talked about a request yesterday, another request for an MZO in Caledon. And it seems to be for warehousing, so it's an employment land request. Does it fall within what the region has designated as an employment area? Adrian?
Through you, Madam Chair, yeah, I'm familiar with that MZO request, and yes, it's located at Dixie and Mayfield Road, and it is sort of just outside of the existing settlement area, but it is within what, through our staff recommended settlement area boundary expansion, we have identified it as employment area. So it does fall within that.
So that's good to know. And was the reports done by their staff? Was there any consultation with us to make sure it was in the right area?
Through you, Madam Chair. So there have been local planning applications on those lands that they've talked to the region about, and in our comments back to them, we let them know it was outside of the municipal boundary, and the timing of our MCR and what have you. But we did let them know as well that it was within the area that we have identified for employment, and was consistent with the draft work that we have underway. So we provide those comments back, yes.
I just thought the article was a bit sensational. That's all. I just wanted to follow up. Thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, Councillor Kiernan, would you move receipt?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any objections? Seeing none, we will move to 5.4. We should go through these meetings this fast all the time, guys. Okay, we're starting on 5.4. Looking to the board to see if there are any questions. Would you like to make any comments to start, Adrian, or we're good to just go into questions?
Yep, good to go, yep.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on 5.4, Peel 2051 draft settlement area boundary expansion update revised mapping? In case somebody's watching at home. Councillor Innes.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up to have a look at it because it's been a couple weeks, but I can't pull it up as fast. So I'm just going to ask Adrian just to make sure. I guess one of the things that we had talked about in Caledon was that the mapping, no matter which options come forward with the GTA West corridor or not, that the mapping include things like both the fingers for options 1 and 2 on the North Hill of Bolton, as an example, to make sure that we're going to the, we're not following concession boundaries, that we're actually following the natural features boundaries and making sure that we're building complete communities. So I just, without being able to pull up that mapping, I just want to make sure that Caledon's comments were heard. I know that during our workshop that we held recently, this was a pretty big issue in the sense of why would we leave one little pocket of area that could be developed in the future? Why not, make sure that it's a complete community planning, no matter what scenario is brought forward. So we just want to make sure that that is in that mapping, and that we're looking to those natural features as the boundaries, as opposed to concessions or mid-concession blocks.
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, I can confirm that in the staff recommended settlement area boundary expansion mapping, that yes, those lands to the north of Bolton, outside of the green belt, have been identified as proposed community lands for some of the reasons that you cite. So yes, that is included in our recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions? Seeing none, Councillor Thompson, will you move receipt of that report? Thank you. Any objections? Seeing none. That takes us to communications. Are we going to move to receive all the communications together, or does anybody want to ask any questions or make comments on any of the communications?
Move to all communications be accepted.
Okay, I have one question on the one from Caledon, a lawyer's letter, Osler. I find it kind of a bit odd that we're getting lawyers' letters to communicate between one of our municipalities and the region. I would like to ask, I guess, Adrian, or maybe ask Janice Baker, does this letter cause us any difficulties? And it seems to ask that they be given notice of any decisions that are made with respect to this matter. But I mean, they have members on this committee. Can they not get their notice from their own members?
I think through you, Madam Chair, I mean, the letter was really just asking for, consultation and I guess registering a couple of significant issues that the town of Caledon has. Which in my understanding from following up with the chief planner are already active conversations that are happening between the region and Caledon. So I certainly, I was a little surprised to see the letter from the lawyer. Having said that, I don't think it causes us any particular concern. I think there are active conversations that are happening. I think Adrian has certainly answered a number of questions this morning that shows that the discussions are active between the region and the town of Caledon. And, there's still plenty of opportunity for input, and we want to move forward in a way that is in the best interests of both the region and the town of Caledon. That's really our goal at the end of the day. And of course, to be compliant with the provincial requirements. So I think we're good.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just a little surprised to get the letter as well. You have 3 very competent Caledon councillors on this committee, and they hold everybody's feet to the fire. So I'm not sure you want to waste money on lawyers, but that's okay. Councillor Innes, did you have a question?
I just want to ask, I know that we've moved receipt of all of the correspondence, but are staff going to be taking into consideration all of the comments made? I know at the previous meeting, Councillor Groves had asked for 6.9 to be held, but she's not a committee member, so she can't. But I guess in that case, and to go back to comments that Caledon Council has been making about completing communities, and this one in particular is in the village of Palgrave. And so I'm asking if are staff taking in the correspondence as for consideration, or are we just receiving it? Because I'd like to make sure that staff are taking some of these into consideration, in particular this one.
Through Madam Chair, yeah, I can assure you that all the correspondence that we receive through the various mechanisms and the delegations and that we certainly take all of that very seriously and factor it into our decision making. And then actually we do prepare on our website detailed comment response tables to all the input that we receive. So these would be included in that. So yeah, definitely we take that as input.
Okay, thank you.
And just for clarification, people have been invited to attend this meeting whenever they wish to, and Annette would be perfectly within her right to ask for a comment on this. She just can't move motions, so we're pretty relaxed here, Jennifer. Okay, so those have been moved for receipt. Anybody object to receipt of the correspondence? Seeing no one, I think we're at the end of the meeting and looking forward to this afternoon. Hopefully some of us or all of us will attend this afternoon, even though we've been through it all. I think it's important for us to show up to the meeting and listen to the questions that are being asked. Councillor Carlson, would you move adjournment? Any objections? Anybody want to stay here and chat a bit longer? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in this morning. And thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Janice. Thank you for staff. Much appreciated.
Thank you.